Tfue by bringing my boyfriend home. He mocked my dad for being weak. Dad revealed he was deep cover DEA for 15 years. BF told his cartel-connected gym buddy. And now we're barricading doors while 3 men sit in a van outside our house. My dad has always been the definition of boring. Polo shirts every day, same prescription glasses since forever, works as a high school history teacher. When my boyfriend Roger asked to come over for dinner last month, I almost said no. Roger was everything my dad wasn't. Amateur MMA fighter, bounced at the roughest clubs downtown, had that dangerous edge that made people cross the street when they saw him coming. Your dad seems nice, Roger said when we pulled up to our cookie-cutter suburban house. I could tell he was already judging the bird feeder and welcome mat. Dinner started fine. Dad asked Roger about his training and work. Mom served her famous pot roast. Then Roger noticed the true crime documentary paused on our TV and everything went downhill fast. You watch this stuff? He asked, chuckling. Bet it's the closest you get to real danger, huh? Sometimes, Dad said quietly. He was cutting his pot roast into methodical, even pieces like he always did. Roger grinned and I knew that look. It was the same one he got before intimidating someone at the club. Yeah, I figured. You strike me as the type who'd call 911 if someone looked at you wrong, Mr. Peterson. No offense. I kicked him under the table, but he kept going. I mean, some people can handle themselves and some people just, he flexed subtly. Some people grade papers. Roger, I hissed, but part of me was embarrassed too. Why couldn't my dad be tougher? Why did he apologize when someone else bumped into him? Mom shot me a look across the table that made my stomach drop. There was something in her eyes I'd never seen before, almost like pity. When I opened my mouth to change the subject, she tapped the table twice. A weird, specific rhythm that meant stop right now. Roger was on a roll now. Actually, speaking of danger, check this out. He pulled up his sleeve to show a fresh bruise from training. Got this from a guy who used to be in a Mexican cartel. Real scary dude. Said I was the toughest guy he'd sparred with. Dad's hand paused mid-cut. Mexican cartel? Yeah, Los Hermanos or something. Guy was telling me all these crazy stories. How they used to run Houston. Had judges in their pocket. The whole thing. Said they were untouchable until some narc took them down. Roger was loving this. But between you and me, I think he was exaggerating. Probably just some local gangbanger trying to sound tough. I started to change the subject, but Mom's hand found my arm. Her grip was iron. Dad set down his fork. He was looking at his plate with an expression I'd never seen before. Los Hermanos Silenciosos. Yeah, that's it. Roger laughed. You Wikipedia it or something, Teach? They didn't run Houston. They ran everything from Brownsville to Dallas. 400 million a year. Called 17 federal agents. Kidnapped a judge's daughter. Dad's voice was different. Flat. Emotionless. Until someone spent 3 years inside. Wore a wire to his own mother's funeral because the cartel showed up to pay respects. The room went silent. Roger's smirk faltered. How would you? The scar on your friend's neck. Diagonal. About 4 inches. He tell you how he got that? Roger nodded slowly, suddenly looking less confident. Hotel Zaragoza. December 15, 2018. He was trying to execute a federal witness. Someone stopped him. Dad looked up and his eyes were empty. Left him alive to send a message. You're saying you, that judge's daughter they kidnapped? Dad continued. Patty Jacobs, 14 years old. Honor student. They had her for 6 days before someone got her back. Carried her out of a warehouse in Matamoros while 11 cartel members bled out around them. Mom stood up and walked to the hallway closet. I heard her moving boxes. She came back carrying a small wooden frame I'd never seen before. Inside was a medal I didn't recognize and a folded American flag. Dad, Tom said softly. Don't. Show him, she said simply, setting it on the table. Next to it, she placed a photograph. A little girl hugging a man whose face was obscured, but I recognized the watch. Dad's watch. That history I teach? Dad said, still in that empty voice. Lived it for 15 years. DEA. Deep cover. The teacher thing isn't a cover story. It's what I chose after I got tired of watching people die. After Christine was born, and I decided being her father mattered more than being a ghost. Roger left without finishing dinner. Didn't even say goodbye. I sat there staring at this stranger wearing my father's face while Mom rubbed my back. Your father has done things, she said quietly. Things that still wake him up at night. That boring man you're embarrassed of? He's boring because the alternative is terrifying. I didn't know it at the time, but Roger's cartel friend had recognized my dad's name when Roger described our dinner, and some ghosts from Houston were about to learn that Tom Peterson was still very much alive. The next morning started like any other, except for the way Mom kept checking the windows. She'd pull back the curtain just enough to scan the street, then let it fall back into place. Dad sat at the kitchen table grading papers, red pen moving across essays with the same methodical precision he'd shown cutting his pot roast. I pushed cereal around my bowl, unable to eat. Everything felt different now. The man who helped me with algebra homework had carried a 14-year-old girl out of a cartel warehouse. The same hands that tied my shoelaces when I was 5 had apparently done things that still haunted him. My phone buzzed. Roger. I let it go to voicemail. Dad looked up from his papers. His expression was the same mild, patient look he always wore, but now I wondered what lay beneath it. Mom moved to the window again, this time lingering longer. The doorbell rang. We all froze. It was 7:23 a.m. Nobody came by this early. Dad set down his pen slowly. He and Mom exchanged a look that lasted maybe 2 seconds, but seemed to contain an entire conversation. She moved toward the stairs while he approached the door, stopping at the hall closet first. I watched him reach behind the winter coats and pull out something I'd never seen before, a small black case. He tucked it behind his back and peered through the peephole. His shoulders relaxed slightly. When he opened the door, our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Bernard, stood there holding a casserole dish. She smiled warmly, explaining she'd made too much breakfast casserole and thought we might enjoy some. Dad thanked her, took the dish, and watched her walk back to her house before closing the door. He returned the black case to the closet. Mom came back downstairs. They didn't need to speak. Whatever they'd been worried about, Mrs. Bernard wasn't it. I grabbed my backpack for school, desperate for normalcy. Dad offered to drive me, something he rarely did. I accepted, sensing this wasn't really optional. The drive started in silence. I watched familiar streets pass by, everything looking exactly the same yet completely different. When we stopped at a red light, Dad finally spoke. He told me that after last night, some people might remember his name. People who held grudges. He said it casually, like discussing the weather, but his knuckles were white on the steering wheel. At school drop-off, he waited until I had my hand on the door handle. Then he gave me 3 rules. Stay in groups. Don't go anywhere alone. Call immediately if anything felt wrong. The way he said it made my chest tight. I nodded and got out. When I looked back, he was still watching, making sure I made made it inside. School passed in a blur. I couldn't focus on anything. In history class, I found myself staring at my teacher differently, wondering what secrets he might be hiding. Everyone seemed suspicious now. The security guard who usually joked with students. The janitor who knew everyone's name. What were their real stories? Roger texted 12 times. I finally read them during lunch. Apologies mostly. Said he felt sick about dinner. Wanted to talk. The last message made me go cold. My sparring buddy wants to meet your dad. Says they have history. I showed it to my best friend Catherine, leaving out the context. She thought Roger was being dramatic, trying to win me back. I wanted to believe her. After school, Mom picked me up instead of letting me take the bus. Another change. She drove a different route home, taking side streets I'd never seen her use. When I asked why, she just said traffic, but her eyes kept looking to the rearview mirror. At home, Dad was in the garage. He'd cleared out a section near the back and was doing something I'd never seen, shadowboxing. His movements were precise, economical, nothing like the showy techniques Roger practiced. These moves were designed for efficiency, not impression. He stopped when he saw me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he asked if I wanted to learn some basic self-defense. Said it was good knowledge for any young woman to have. The timing wasn't coincidental, but I said yes anyway. We started simple. How to break a grip if someone grabbed my wrist. Where to strike if cornered. How to use everyday objects as weapons. His teaching style was the same as when he helped with homework. Patient, thorough, making sure I understood each concept before moving on. Mom watched from the doorway, arms crossed. When Dad showed me how to escape a chokehold, she stepped in to demonstrate the counter move. They moved together like dancers who'd rehearsed these steps before. Dinner was quiet. We ate leftover pot roast, the irony not lost on any of us. Dad's phone rang twice. Both times he checked the number and let it go to voicemail. The second time, Mom got up and unplugged the landline. That night, I heard them talking in their bedroom. Low voices, but I caught fragments. 3 years and statute of limitations, and they can't prove anything. Mom's voice was steady, practical. Dad's carried a weight I'd never heard before. There's something really odd about how quickly Roger's friend wants to meet Dad after just one dinner story. Makes me wonder what exactly Roger told him, and why this cartel guy is suddenly so interested in a suburban history teacher. I lay in bed thinking about Roger's message. His sparring buddy who wanted to meet Dad, who had history with him. The scar on the man's neck that Dad had known about. Hotel Zaragoza, December 15th, 2018. How did you remember dates like that unless they mattered? My phone lit up. Another text from Roger. This one just said, he knows where you live. I sat up, heart hammering. Started to get up to tell my parents, then stopped. Through my window, I could see a car parked across the street. It hadn't been there when we got home. The driver was just a shadow, but I could see the ember of a cigarette glowing in the dark. I watched for 20 minutes. The car didn't move. Neither did the driver. Just sat there, smoking, waiting. Finally, I crept to my parents' room. Dad answered before I could knock, like he'd been awake. I told him about the car. He moved to their bedroom window, staying to the side, peering out without being seen. Mom was already up, pulling on a robe. They had another of those wordless conversations. Then Dad told me to go back to my room, lock the door, and push my dresser in front of it. Said it was just a precaution. I did what he said, hands shaking as I struggled with a heavy dresser. Through my window, I could see Dad's silhouette moving through the house, checking windows, doors. The car across the street remained. At some point, I must have dozed off sitting against my dresser. I woke to the sound of a car door slamming. The vehicle across the street was pulling away. Dawn was breaking. We'd made it through the night, but I knew this was just the beginning. The morning sun felt wrong on my face as I pushed the dresser back from my door. My arms ached from sleeping propped against it. Downstairs, Mom was making breakfast like nothing had happened, but her movements were too quick, too precise. Dad sat at the table with his laptop open, fingers flying across the keyboard. I grabbed toast and watched him work. He was checking security camera footage from our neighbor's Ring doorbells, cross-referencing license plates, building a timeline. The boring history teacher was gone. This was someone else entirely. My phone vibrated. Roger again, this time with a photo attachment. My hand trembled as I opened it. The image showed 3 men sitting in what looked like a diner booth. One had a diagonal scar on his neck. Another wore sunglasses indoors. The third was Roger, looking pale and small between them. Dad glanced at my screen and his jaw tightened. He took my phone, studied the image, then handed it back. His fingers drummed once on the table, a pattern I'd never noticed before. Mom immediately moved to the window. School wasn't optional that day. Dad made that clear. Routine mattered. But he drove me again, taking a different route than yesterday. At drop-off, he scanned every car in the lot before letting me out. Inside my backpack, he'd tucked a small canister of pepper spray and a personal alarm. Legal, common items any father might give his daughter. The tactical pen he'd shown me how to use stayed in my pocket. First period dragged. I kept checking my phone, expecting another message from Roger. Nothing came. Catherine Sheen noticed my distraction and passed notes asking if I was okay. I nodded, forced a smile, tried to seem normal. The fire alarm shrieked during second period. Everyone groaned and filed out for what we assumed was another drill. But as we gathered on the football field, I noticed something wrong. The administrators looked confused, checking clipboards, making calls. This wasn't scheduled. I scanned the crowd of students, that familiar tightness returning to my chest. Movement near the parking lot caught my eye. A man in maintenance coveralls was walking between cars, but something about his gait seemed off. Too purposeful, too focused. When he turned slightly, I glimpsed sunglasses beneath his cap. My hand found the pepper spray in my backpack. The man continued through the lot, pausing at each silver Honda like he was checking for something, or someone. When he reached the area where Mom had dropped me off, he stopped, pulled out his phone, and took photos. The all clear sounded, and we filed back inside. I texted Dad immediately, describing what I'd seen. His response came fast. Stay inside. Mom's coming. Catherine asked about my early dismissal when I got called to the office. I made up something about a dentist appointment, hating the lie, but knowing the truth was worse. Mom waited in the office, chatting casually with the secretary about fundraiser plans. Only I noticed how her purse stayed open, hand resting inside. The ride home took twice as long as usual. Mom drove seemingly random patterns through our suburb, doubling back, cutting through parking lots. She explained it calmly, like teaching me to parallel park. Always check mirrors. Never take the same route twice. Know where you're going before you need to go there. At home, Dad had been busy. Nothing looked different from the street, but inside I noticed subtle changes. Small wooden wedges by each door. The decorative mirror in the entryway adjusted to show the porch. Kitchen knives moved to a magnetic strip within easy reach. He'd even rearranged furniture slightly, creating clear paths through each room while blocking direct lines from windows. We ate lunch in shifts. Someone someone always watching the street. Dad showed me more self-defense moves, focusing on escapes and distance-creating techniques. Mom demonstrated how ordinary objects became tools. A rolled magazine, car keys between fingers. Even a coffee mug could buy precious seconds. Roger called that afternoon. Dad put it on speaker but gestured for me to answer. Roger's voice shook as he explained that his sparring partner, a man named Hector, had gotten very interested in our family after Roger mentioned dinner. Asked lots of questions. Wanted to know about Dad's work schedule, our routines, if we had dogs or alarm systems. Dad made notes while Roger talked. When Roger started apologizing, saying he didn't mean for this to happen, Dad cut him off with a gesture. I told Roger I had to go, that we'd talk later. We wouldn't. The rest of the afternoon passed in strange normalcy. Dad graded papers at the dining table where he could see both front and back doors. Mom prepared dinner, keeping her phone propped where she could monitor our doorbell camera. I did homework, trying to focus on calculus while my parents turned our suburban home into something else. Dinner was tense. We ate in near silence, forks scraping plates. Every car that passed made us pause. When headlights swept across our windows, Dad would glance up, track their progress, then return to his meal. The doorbell rang at 7:47 p.m. This time, Dad didn't hesitate. He moved to the side of the door while Mom guided me behind the kitchen island. Through the peephole, he studied whoever stood outside. His shoulders relaxed marginally. He opened the door to reveal Mrs. Bernard again, this time holding a package. She explained that it had been delivered to her by mistake. Dad thanked her, took the package, and watched her return home. But his expression when he closed the door made my stomach drop. We hadn't ordered anything. He set the package on the kitchen counter and carefully examined it. No return address. Our names spelled correctly, but written in block letters. He got a knife and delicately cut the tape, peeling back cardboard flaps like defusing a bomb. Inside was a Houston Astros cap. Nothing else. Just a worn baseball cap that made Dad go very still. Mom moved closer, saw the cap, and immediately pulled out her phone. She spoke quietly to someone, using terms I didn't understand. Grid references, time windows, asset confirmation. Dad lifted the cap carefully. Underneath was a photo. Him, years younger, standing next to a car. The photo was burned around the edges except for his face, which remained untouched. A message without words. They sent me upstairs while they made calls. I sat on my bed, door cracked, listening to fragments of conversation, old names mentioned, contingency plans discussed. At one point, Mom's voice rose sharply before Dad calmed her. Whatever they were planning, they disagreed on approach. Sleep came in fragments that night. Every sound jolted me awake. Car doors, wind against windows. The house's normal settling became sinister. Around 3 a.m., I gave up and crept to my window. The street looked empty, but I knew better now. Empty didn't mean safe. Morning brought new challenges. Dad announced we were taking a family day, just the three of us. Mom packed a picnic basket while he loaded the car with more than seemed necessary for a day trip. Blankets, first aid kit, extra water, tools I didn't recognize. We drove for an hour, past city limits, into areas I'd never seen. Dad constantly checked mirrors while Mom navigated using paper maps instead of GPS. They communicated in half sentences, years of partnership evident in their shorthand. We stopped at a state park, nearly deserted on a weekday. Dad chose a picnic spot with clear sightlines in all directions. While Mom unpacked food, he walked the perimeter, noting access roads, checking cell signal strength. Always the teacher, he explained what he was doing. Situational awareness, exit strategies, the vocabulary of a life I was just beginning to understand. Lunch was almost pleasant. We sat on scratchy blankets eating sandwiches while Dad told stories about his teaching career. Safe stories. But I heard the gaps now, the years he glossed over, the vague explanations for moves and job changes. Mom added details occasionally, painting a picture of a man trying to build a normal life on an abnormal foundation. The drive back took a different route. Dad stopped at a storage facility I didn't know we used. He went inside alone while Mom and I waited in the running car. He returned carrying a small duffel bag that he placed in the trunk without explanation. Dad's running security checks on Ring footage while making breakfast prep look like a contact sport, and suddenly Roger's in a diner photo looking like the world's most uncomfortable sandwich filling between two scary guys. At home, everything looked normal. No strange cars, no packages, but the tension remained. Dad unpacked the duffel in their bedroom while Mom started dinner. I heard metallic clicks, zippers, the sound of items being organized. Roger texted again that evening. A longer message explaining that Hector and two friends had been asking about our family all day. Wanted to know if Dad had any old friends visit, if he ever talked about Houston, if we had vacation plans. Roger swore he hadn't told them anything else, but the damage was already done. We developed new routines over the following days. Different routes to school, varied pickup times, random errands that seemed purposeless but let us check for surveillance. Dad taught me to notice things. The same car at different locations. People who turned away too quickly. Patterns that didn't belong. School became a challenge. I couldn't explain why I insisted on sitting where I could see doors. Why I jumped at unexpected noises. Catherine grew concerned, but I deflected with excuses about stress, college applications, normal teenage problems. The second package arrived on a Thursday. This time at school, handed to me by the office secretary who said someone dropped it off for me. No name, no explanation. Just my name in those same block letters. I texted Dad immediately. He arrived within minutes, still in his teaching clothes but moving with purpose that made other parents step aside. He took the package without opening it, guided me to the car, and drove home in silence. Inside, with doors locked and blinds drawn, he opened it carefully. A child's drawing. Crayon figures of a family, 3 people holding hands, but the father figure was crossed out in red. Below it, coordinates written in precise numbers. Mom looked at the coordinates on her phone. Her face went pale. It was the warehouse in Matamoros, where Dad had carried out Patty Jacobs, where 11 men had died. They argued that night. Real arguing, not their usual quiet discussions. Mom wanted to leave, start over somewhere new. Dad insisted running would only delay the inevitable. Old ghosts had found them. Running meant looking over shoulders forever. I sat on the stairs listening, understanding finally why Dad had chosen boring, why he apologized when bumped, why he avoided conflict, not from weakness but from strength. He knew what he was capable of and chose differently, until now. The third car appeared on Saturday, different from the others, older, with Texas plates. It parked 3 houses down and stayed. Dad noted the arrival but didn't react beyond that. We maintained routines, groceries, errands, normal suburban suburban life with an undercurrent of preparation. That night, Mom showed me things I never expected to learn. How to barricade a door properly, which windows offered the best exit routes, where they'd hidden emergency supplies. She spoke matter-of-factly, like teaching me to do laundry. Essential life skills for their daughter. Sunday brought visitors, not threatening ones, but still unexpected. A couple dad's age arrived in a rental car, looking like tourists who'd gotten lost, but the way they moved, checked surroundings, approached our door, told a different story. Dad let them in without hesitation. They spoke in the kitchen while I was sent upstairs, but voices carried references to Houston, to old operations, to debts owed and favors available. When they left, Dad looked older somehow. Whatever they'd offered, he'd declined. The pattern continued through the week. Surveillance cars rotating, packages arriving with increasing frequency, each containing some reminder of Dad's past. Photos, news clippings, items whose significance I couldn't grasp, but that made my parents exchange dark looks. Roger stopped texting after that second week. Catherine told me he'd dropped out of his MMA gym suddenly, moved back with his parents in another state, or so the story went. I wondered what really happened but didn't ask. Some answers were better left unknown. Dad's teaching changed too. His self-defense lessons became more intense. Less about escape, more about ending threats quickly. He taught me to think tactically. Multiple attackers, confined spaces, using environment as weapon. Mom participated now, showing techniques that spoke of her own training. We installed new locks, reinforced doors, security film on windows that would hold even if glass shattered. Each upgrade subtle, nothing that would alarm neighbors, but our suburban home was becoming something else. A fortress disguised as normalcy. The watchers grew bolder. Sometimes they'd sit in cars for hours. Other times they'd walk past, taking photos openly. Dad documented everything. License plates, faces, times, building a file for reasons he didn't share. One evening, while Mom was at the grocery store, a man approached our front door. Not sneaking, just walking up like a salesman or delivery person. Dad watched through the peephole as the man stood there, not knocking, just waiting. After 5 minutes, he left something on our porch and walked away. It was a bullet, just one. Standing upright on our welcome mat like a tiny monument. Dad photographed it, then swept it into an evidence bag with practiced movements. Another message, another escalation. Mom returned with groceries and something else. A woman I'd never seen before sat in our living room when I came downstairs. Ordinary looking, middle-aged, could have been someone's aunt, but her eyes tracked everything, and when she stood, her jacket shifted enough to show a holster. She introduced herself only as a friend from the old days, someone who owed Dad favors. She'd be staying nearby for a while, she said, just visiting the area, the kind of visit where someone watched our house at night while we slept. School became my only escape, but even that felt tainted. I caught myself using Dad's techniques constantly, noting exits, watching shadows, sitting where I could see approaches. Catherine finally confronted me, worried about my behavior. I wanted to tell her everything but couldn't. How do you explain your boring father used to be someone else? That your family was living under siege in suburbia? The fourth week brought a new development. Hector himself appeared, not hiding, not watching from cars. He stood across the street in broad daylight, smoking a cigarette, making sure we saw him. When Dad emerged to get the mail, they stared at each other across suburban asphalt like gunfighters. Neither spoke, neither moved beyond necessary actions, but messages were exchanged in that silence. After 10 minutes, Hector dropped his cigarette, crushed it deliberately, and walked away. Dad returned inside with the mail and immediately made calls. That night, we had a family meeting. Dad explained what was coming. Not details, but enough. The watchers were done watching. Whatever they planned would happen soon. We had options. Mom's friend could take me somewhere safe. They could handle what came next. I refused. This was my family, my home. Whatever was coming, we'd face it together. Mom argued. Dad stayed quiet, but I saw something in his eyes. Pride, maybe, or recognition. His daughter choosing to stand rather than run. We prepared differently after that. Less about defense, more about offense. Dad showed me where they'd place things. Weapons disguised as everyday objects. Escape routes if needed. Rally points if separated. The boring history teacher was gone completely now, replaced by someone who'd survived 15 years in hell. The final package arrived on a Tuesday, hand-delivered by Hector himself, who rang the doorbell and waited politely like a neighbor. Dad opened the door, accepted the package, and they exchanged brief words I couldn't hear. Hector smiled, tipped an imaginary hat, and left. Inside was a single item, a photo of our family at last year's school fundraiser, the kind any parent might have on their desk, except our faces were circled in red, all three of us. No more messages about just Dad. They'd escalated to the final level. That night, I heard Mom crying for the first time in my life, quiet sobs behind their bedroom door, Dad's low voice offering comfort, the weight of choices made long ago pressing down on our suburban home. Morning came too soon. Dad made breakfast like always. Mom packed lunches. I gathered homework, normal actions with trembling hands. We all knew something had shifted. The watching was over. Whatever came next would come fast. Dad drove me to school, but we didn't go straight there. He stopped at the bank, withdrew cash, stopped at a lawyer's office, signed papers, stopped at the storage unit, retrieved another bag, preparing for aftermath, whatever form it took. At school drop-off, he held my hand longer than usual, reminded me of our plans, our signals, our rally points, told me he was proud of who I'd become, the kind of words fathers say for weddings or graduations, not Tuesday mornings. I wanted to skip school, stay home, face whatever was coming together, but he insisted. Routine mattered. Besides, school was safer. Public. Witnesses. They wouldn't move there, probably. Classes blurred together. I texted Mom every hour, getting responses that seemed normal but felt forced. Catherine noticed my distraction, tried to cheer me up with gossip and jokes. I smiled, played along, counted minutes until dismissal. The secretary called me to the office during last period. My heart hammered as I gathered my things, but it was just Mom, smiling tightly, signing me out early for another appointment. We walked to the car normally, her hand light on my back, guiding but not pushing. The drive home was silent. Mom took the direct route this time. No evasion, no doubles back. When I asked why, she simply said it was time. Whatever had been building for weeks would resolve today. The waiting was over. Our street looked normal as we turned onto it. Kids playing. Something feels off about Dad turning down help from those old friends who showed up. Why refuse backup when Hector's crew is clearly escalating? The timing of Roger suddenly vanishing and that woman with the holster appearing seems too neat, like pieces being moved on a board we can't fully see. sprinklers running, suburban life continuing unaware. But I noticed things now. The unfamiliar van parked near the corner, the way Mrs. Bernard's blinds were drawn tight, the absence of the usual dog walkers. Dad's car was already in the driveway. He stood in the garage, door open, working on something at his workbench, the picture of suburban normalcy. But I saw the tension in his shoulders, the way he positioned himself to see approaches, the casual placement of tools within reach. We pulled in beside him. Mom's hand found mine as we exited, squeezed once, a message without words. Together we walked into our house, into whatever was waiting, into the end of one story and the beginning of another. Inside, everything looked normal. Afternoon sun through windows, mail on the counter, the ordinary details of our ordinary life, but underneath, currents of preparation, of readiness, of family preparing to defend what mattered. Dad closed the garage door with deliberate finality, locked it, set the alarm, small actions that felt larger, drawing boundaries, making choices. The boring history teacher was gone, but the father remained. Different skills, same purpose. We settled into position without discussion. Dad in the living room where he could see front and back, Mom in the kitchen with sight lines to the garage and side door, me upstairs where I could monitor the street and access the attic if needed, not hiding, watching, waiting. The house felt different, charged, like the moment before lightning strikes, every sound amplified, every movement deliberate. We were ready for whatever came next, together. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, then remembered Dad's instructions. Information mattered, even from enemies, especially from enemies. The message was simple. 1 hour. I called down to Dad. He climbed the stairs, read the message, nodded once. 1 hour. After weeks of watching and waiting, we had a timeline. He squeezed my shoulder, reminded me of our signals, then returned to his position. Time moved strangely. Minutes felt like hours, seconds like minutes. I watched the street, noting each car, each pedestrian. The van hadn't moved. No new vehicles appeared, but I knew they were coming. The calm before. 45 minutes. Mom brought me water, checked window locks, adjusted curtains slightly. Her movements were economical, purposeful. She'd done this before, I realized. Maybe not exactly this, but something close. Dad wasn't the only one with a past. 30 minutes. A text from Catherine asking about homework. I responded normally, maintaining the illusion. Part of me wanted to warn her, tell her to stay away, but that might draw attention. Better to seem unaware, to play the part of normal teenager in abnormal circumstances. 15 minutes. Dad moved through the house, checking positions, testing locks. He paused at my door, gave me a look that said everything. Love, pride, determination. Then continued his rounds, the teacher preparing his final lesson. 10 minutes. The street remained quiet. Too quiet. Even the birds had stopped singing. Mom called up that she was making tea. Such a normal thing, but I heard the undercurrent. Tea meant she was in position. Ready. 5 minutes. Movement caught my eye. Not the van. Not a car. Mrs. Bernard, stepping onto her porch with a watering can. Nothing unusual except the time. She never watered plants in late afternoon. Dad had noticed too. I heard him shift positions below. 3 minutes. My hands were steady as I checked my phone again. No new messages. Just the countdown in my head. The pepper spray in my pocket. The tactical pen in my hand. Small protections against large threats. 1 minute. The van's engine started. No other movement. Just that single sign. They were coming. However many. Whatever they planned. The waiting was over. A car turned onto our street, moving normally. Not speeding. Not suspicious except for the timing. It passed the van without stopping. Passed Mrs. Bernard without slowing. Pulled into our driveway like 1,000 deliveries before. 3 men exited. Hector and 2 others. They didn't rush. Didn't sneak. Just walked to our front door like invited guests. The doorbell rang. Its normal chime somehow ominous. Dad answered. I couldn't see from my position, but I heard voices. Calm, conversational. The kind of discussion that happened every day in suburbia, except for what lay beneath. They entered. I heard footsteps, multiple sets, moving into our living room, sitting down, the creak of furniture, the clink of Mom's tea service. Hospitality extended even now, especially now. Voices rose and fell. Not angry, not threatening, just talking. But I caught fragments. Houston, debts, messages, the past reaching into the present, demanding resolution. Then silence. Long enough that I almost crept to the stairs, almost broke position. But Dad had been clear. Trust the plan. Trust each other. Trust that boring could be a choice, not a weakness. Movement again. Footsteps. The front door opening. I risked a look through my window. The 3 men were leaving, walking calmly to their car. Hector paused at the driver's door, looked up at my window, and nodded once. Acknowledgement, conclusion, goodbye. They drove away. The van followed minutes later. The street returned to normal. Kids resumed playing. Birds sang again. Suburban life continued, unaware of what had just shifted. I found my parents in the kitchen. Dad was washing teacups. Mom was putting away the good china. They moved normally, but I saw the relief in their shoulders. The release of weeks of tension. They explained simply. Debts had been discussed. Old grievances aired. Accommodations reached. Not friendship, not forgiveness, but understanding. The kind that came from professionals recognizing each other across changed circumstances. Hector had lost brothers in Matamoros, wanted revenge, spent years planning. But seeing Dad now, seeing us, seeing what he'd built and why, had shifted something. The man who'd carried Patty Jacobs out of hell had paid his own prices, had chosen different paths, had earned something Hector understood, even if he couldn't forgive. There would be no more packages, no more watchers, no more threats. The message had been delivered, the debt acknowledged. The past, while not buried, would stay where it belonged. We ate dinner together that night. Real dinner, not the tense meals of recent weeks. Dad told stories about his students. Mom laughed at his jokes. I complained about homework, normal sounds in a normal house. But underneath, things had changed. I'd seen my father's other face, learned my mother's capabilities, discovered my own strength. The boring facade remained, but I understood now what it protected, what it cost, what it meant. Roger never came back. His apartment stayed empty. His things eventually cleared out by strangers. I heard rumors he'd moved across the country, started over, learned hard lessons about the stories people carry, about the dangers of assumptions, about the price of arrogance. Catherine noticed changes in me, said I seemed more confident, more aware, more myself somehow. I couldn't explain that I'd learned who I was by discovering who my parents had been. That boring was a choice made by interesting people. That strength sometimes looked like weakness to those who didn't understand. The self-defense lessons continued, but different differently now, less urgent, more thorough. Skills passed down not from immediate need, but from wisdom. From parents who knew the world's edges to a daughter who might never need to visit them, but would be ready if she did. Months later, I was cleaning my room when I found the photo Hector had left. Our family at the fundraiser, circles faded, but still visible. I almost threw it away, then stopped, tucked it into my journal instead. A reminder, a warning, a promise. My dad was still boring, still wore polo shirts, still graded papers with meticulous care, still apologized when bumped, but I saw him differently now. Saw the choice in every ordinary action, the strength in every mundane moment, the love in every normal day. Some fathers protected their children from monsters under the bed. Mine had been the monster once, then chosen to become the bed instead. Solid, stable, safe, boring by design, extraordinary in its ordinariness. The bird feeder still hung by our front door. The welcome mat still said, "Home sweet home." But I knew now what those simple things guarded, what they represented, what they cost. And I was grateful for every boring moment. I need to create the ending section that resolves the established plot about the family facing cartel revenge threats. The middle section ended with the 3 men, Hector and 2 others, arriving at the house after a 1-hour warning. I must continue from this exact moment and maintain 97% action until near the end. The conversation downstairs stretched on. I counted heartbeats, watching through my bedroom window as Mrs. Bernard continued her suspicious plant watering routine. Her movements were too deliberate, checking our driveway between each pot. Dad's voice carried up occasionally, steady and measured, but I couldn't make out words. 20 minutes passed. The tactical pen grew slick in my palm. Movement outside caught my attention. The van from earlier was circling back, creeping past our house at walking speed. The driver's face was obscured, but I recognized the surveillance pattern Dad had taught me to spot. Footsteps on the stairs made me tense. Mom appeared in my doorway, her expression carefully neutral. She gestured for me to follow her to the hallway, positioning us where we could see both the staircase and the attic access. Her hand rested on the small of her back where I'd seen her tuck something earlier. The voices below grew louder, not shouting, but intense. I heard furniture scraping across hardwood. Mom's jaw tightened. She motioned for me to stay put while she moved to the top of the stairs, peering down without exposing herself. Mom's got something tucked in her waistband while doing the world's most casual hallway patrol. Guess PTA president wasn't her only past job title after all. A door slammed. The garage. Dad's security system chimed its warning. Someone had breached the side entrance. Mom pulled me back into my room, quickly but calmly barricading the door with my dresser. She pointed to the window. Our predetermined escape route if needed. Heavy footsteps thundered up the stairs, not Dad's measured gait. Mom positioned herself between me and the door, pulling a compact pistol from her waistband. The same practiced ease I'd seen when she demonstrated self-defense moves. The doorknob rattled, stopped. A shoulder hit the door hard, but the dresser held. Mom tracked the sound with her weapon, completely transformed from the woman who made pot roasts and attended PTA meetings. Glass shattered downstairs, multiple windows by the sound. The house alarm shrieked to life. Through my window, I saw 2 more men climbing out of the van, heading for our front door. The quiet suburban street had become a battlefield. Mom made a decision. She yanked open my window, scanning the roof tiles below. Clear. She helped me through, then followed with surprising agility. We crawled along the sloped surface to the oak tree Dad had specifically maintained for this purpose, thick branches reaching toward the house like escape routes. As we descended, I glimpsed chaos through the windows. Furniture overturned, Dad grappling with one of Hector's men in the kitchen. The boring history teacher moved with lethal efficiency, using the confined space to his advantage. We hit the ground running. Mom led us not to the street but through the Johnsons' backyard, following a route we'd only discussed in theory. Behind us, I heard shouting, the alarm still wailing, Mrs. Bernard's voice calling 911 with suspicious readiness. The storage unit was our rally point. Mom had the key ready before we even reached it. Inside, more surprises. A older sedan I'd never seen, keys in the ignition, go bags already loaded. They'd prepared for this possibility down to the smallest detail. Mom started the car while I watched the entrance. No pursuit yet. She drove carefully, obeying every traffic law. Just another suburban mom running errands with her daughter. Only her white knuckles on the steering wheel betrayed the tension. My phone buzzed. Dad. A single word that meant he was safe and heading to the secondary location. Mom visibly relaxed, though she maintained her vigilance. We drove in expanding circles, checking for tails, before heading to the predetermined safe house, a nondescript apartment Dad had apparently maintained for years. He was already there when we arrived, moving stiffly but intact. A cut above his eye was the only visible damage. He hugged us both fiercely, then immediately began checking windows, setting up sight lines, reverting to operator mode. Mom tended his wound while he made calls, short-coded conversations with people whose names I didn't recognize, old contacts, favors called in, a network awakening after years of dormancy. Within an hour, he had intelligence flowing in. The situation was worse than expected. Roger hadn't just mentioned our dinner conversation. He'd been feeding information to Hector for weeks, trying to impress his new friends with insider knowledge about a former DEA agent. Every detail about our routines, our home layout, Mom's schedule, my school, all sold for Jim credibility and tough guy approval. But Hector had made mistakes too. The home invasion was sloppy, emotional, driven by revenge rather than planning. Multiple witnesses, clear fingerprints, the van's plates captured on every Ring doorbell on our street. Local police were already hunting for them, not because of Dad's past, but because they'd violated the suburban peace. We stayed in the safe house for 3 days. Dad coordinated with his network while Mom monitored news and social media. I did homework, maintaining normalcy even in chaos. The familiar routine of calculus problems felt surreal after crawling across rooftops. Updates trickled in. 2 of Hector's men arrested during a traffic stop, the van's description having been broadcast citywide. The 3rd caught trying to cross back into Mexico. Hector himself remained at large, but his support structure was crumbling. On the 4th day, Dad received a call that changed everything. Roger had been found in his apartment, struck severely. Hector had discovered his information was incomplete, that Roger had held back crucial details out of some twisted sense of loyalty or self-preservation. The betrayer betrayed. Catherine texted constantly, worried about my absence from school. I crafted careful responses about a family emergency, hating the deception but understanding its necessity. Some Some truths were too heavy for friendship. A week passed. The apartment felt smaller each day. Dad grew restless, Mom quieter. We were safe but suspended, unable to move forward or back. Then came unexpected news. Hector had been arrested trying to hire local muscle for another attempt. His obsession had made him reckless, predictable. The legal system moved slowly but inevitably. Charges piled up: home invasion, assault, conspiracy, interstate flight. Federal prosecutors, alerted by Dad's old contacts, took interest. Not because of ancient cartel connections, but due to the current crimes. The past informed the present without defining it. We returned home after 2 weeks. The house felt different, violated. Mom and I packed while Dad supervised repairs. New windows, stronger doors, upgraded security systems. The suburban fortress rebuilt stronger than before. But we didn't stay. The decision had been made during those long nights in the safe house. This chapter was closing. Dad took a teaching position 3 states away. Similar suburb, similar school, similar polo shirts and boring routine. But we all understood now what lay beneath that careful construction. The move happened quickly. Professional movers who didn't ask questions about the reinforced door frames or the subtle modifications throughout the house. Our neighbors watched sadly, believing the cover story about a job opportunity too good to refuse. Mrs. Bernard brought cookies on our last day, pressing them into Mom's hands with knowing eyes. She'd been a refugee once, she mentioned casually, understood about fresh starts, about leaving the past behind, about the price of peace. Catherine cried when I told her, promised to stay in touch, made plans to visit that we both knew would fade with distance and time. Some friendships couldn't survive certain truths. I hugged her goodbye, mourning the innocence we'd both lost in different ways. The drive to our new home took 2 days. We stopped at anonymous motels, paid cash, maintained vigilance even though the immediate threat had passed. Old habits, hard-earned paranoia. The cost of Dad's former life would always shadow us, but we'd proven we could face it together. Our new house was smaller but had better sightlines. Dad walked the perimeter that first night, noting escape routes and defensive positions. Mom unpacked with strategic precision, keeping essentials accessible. I chose a bedroom with windows facing 2 directions and a closet that could be barricaded. School started the following week. New faces, new teachers, new opportunities to be nobody special. I sat where I could see exits, kept my back to walls, noticed things other teenagers missed. But I also laughed at jokes, made tentative friends, began building a new normal. Dad resumed his boring persona with practiced ease, coaching chess club, grading papers at the kitchen table, apologizing when bumped in hallways. But sometimes I caught other teachers watching him, sensing something beneath the surface they couldn't quite identify. Mom found work at a local clinic, her nursing skills rusty but recoverable. She made friends with careful deliberation, maintaining distance while projecting warmth, the balance of connection without exposure, a skill I was learning to emulate. Months passed. The sharp edges of fear dulled into watchfulness. We developed new routines, new favorite restaurants, new shortcuts through unfamiliar streets. Life accumulated in small moments, normal moments, boring moments we'd earned through blood and preparation. Roger sent a letter once, forwarded through our old address, an apology written in shaky handwriting. He'd lost partial vision in one eye, walked with a permanent limp, consequences of betrayal from both sides. I read it twice, then gave it to Dad to burn. Some bridges couldn't be rebuilt. Hector got 15 years, federal time, no parole. The news came through Dad's network, delivered without fanfare. Justice served not through revenge, but through the system Dad had once served. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. We never spoke about returning to our old life. That door had closed the moment Roger opened his mouth at dinner. But we also didn't live in fear. We lived in readiness, in awareness, in the knowledge that boring was a choice we made daily. I graduated high school with honors, gave a speech about resilience that made Mom cry and Dad stand a little straighter, chose a college close enough to visit but far enough to grow, started studying criminal justice, to Dad's surprise and Mom's knowing smile. The night before I left for college, we sat on our back porch watching fireflies. Dad wore his usual polo shirt. Mom sipped tea from her favorite mug. I memorized their faces. These people who'd taught me that strength came in many forms. They'd given me tools, not just the tactical pen or self-defense moves, but deeper skills. How to read people, how to trust carefully, how to build a life worth defending, how to choose boring when the alternative was chaos. I packed my dorm room with the same strategic precision Mom had taught me. Exits noted, defensive positions identified, but also with posters and photos and all the trivial decorations of a normal college freshman. Balance in all things. My roommate chattered about boys and parties while I nodded and smiled. She had no idea about the pepper spray in my backpack or the escape routes I'd already mapped. Didn't need to. My boring was my choice, my shield, my inheritance. Sometimes I wondered about the girl I'd been before that dinner with Roger, embarrassed by her father's apparent weakness, blind to the strength in choosing peace. That girl felt like a stranger now, naive and impossibly young, but I was grateful to her too. Her blindness had protected her. Let her have a childhood unmarked by vigilance. Dad's greatest gift hadn't been teaching me to fight, but allowing me to grow up feeling safe enough not to need to. Now I carried both versions of myself, the innocent and the aware, the protected and the protector, the girl who'd wanted a dangerous boyfriend and the woman who understood that real danger didn't announce itself with swagger. My phone buzzed, a text from Dad, just checking in, making sure I'd arrived safely, reminding me about the campus security escort service. Normal parent concerns with abnormal weight behind them. I responded with reassurances and a heart emoji. Outside my window, other freshmen hauled belongings into dorms, laughing, carefree, unaware of the various histories surrounding them, the secrets their peers carried, the stories hidden beneath boring surfaces. I envied and pitied them in equal measure. That night, lying in an unfamiliar bed, I thought about transformation, how a single dinner could shatter illusions, how danger could unite a family, how boring could be the highest form of strength, how love could look like teaching your daughter to survive. My dad was still boring, would always be boring. Polo shirts and red pens and parent-teacher conferences, but I knew now what that boring protected, what it cost, what it meant, and I was proud to be his daughter. The next morning, I woke to my roommate's alarm and the bustle of dormitory life, classes to attend, friends to make, a future to build on the foundation my parents had provided, a normal life constructed with abnormal care. I chose my clothes thoughtfully, dressed like every other freshman. Jeans, jeans, and a college sweatshirt. Nothing tactical. Nothing that suggested the skills I carried. Just another boring student beginning another boring day. And I was perfectly content with that choice. I'd appreciate you letting me toss in my 2 cents along the way. It's been a trip. Subscribe for more content like this. Catch you in the next adventure.